Welcome to Beyond the Walls, a podcast for women ready to break barriers and step boldly into their purpose. I'm Kylie, your coach and guide for overcoming fear, silencing self-doubt, and building a life of courage and connection. Whether faith is your anchor or you're still trying to figure it out, this is a space for growth, authenticity, and transformation. Subscribe now and let's start building the courage to be seen, heard, and unstoppable. This is Beyond the Walls, where your purpose begins. When is the last time that you were invited into somebody's home for a meal? When was the last time you invited somebody into your home for a meal? Or maybe just a cup of coffee or hot tea, right? Maybe it was just to come over to visit, to do something. When was the last time? Some of you might be thinking, I've never done that. That is the most foreign concept. That has never been, it wasn't my childhood. It's nothing I've experienced so far. I've never wanted it. That's a weird question. Some of you might be feeling like, oh man, like we used to go to people's homes a lot, and it's been a really long time. And some of you might be still really active in that way. Like that just is the circle of friends that you have or the community that you're a part of. Or maybe it's the same familiar people, right? Like maybe it's just family that you have in your home. But so when's the last time you had somebody new in your home, or you were invited to somebody else's house that was new? There's this comedian, his name is Sebastian Maniscalco. I highly recommend you go listen to this clip. It's hilarious. And so for some of you that had, like, you didn't grow up in houses that had company or was entertaining a lot, right? Like we would have called it company when you had people over in your home for dinner. I grew up in a house where we had a significant amount of company. And so that was a total normal way of life for me growing up. But this comedian, he does this whole bit of like what it was like back in the day and how exciting it was to have company. Like people would just stop by unannounced. His mom like prepared in advance and would have this, it's called Entenmann's, is this particular brand that I remember fondly loving as a child that we rarely ever had. I mean, it's just a basic, I'm sure you would know it if you saw it in the store, but they have just those like coffee cakes that are delicious. And so she would purchase it, right? And make this big announcement, like, nobody open this, don't touch it, because it's for company just in case somebody stops by, right? And he's like, you hoped that somebody would come by just so we could have this cake. And so, he's just elaborate on this whole experience, which is hilarious. And then fast forward to now, right? In this clip, I mean, I think he did this maybe even 10 years ago. So I think it's gotten a little bit worse maybe since COVID, but I think it's been a dying concept, right? Because somewhere, and I definitely remember this, like having a very hospitable home growing up. I love having people over. I love connecting with people. That something switched. Like even when my kids were little, like people don't just stop by unannounced, right? Like if somebody's knocking or ringing the bell, I'm like terrified. I literally remember my kids being little and then it'd be like 12 o'clock in the afternoon and I'm home with them and somebody rings the bell. I am literally hiding. Like, why is somebody ringing my bell? Who is here? Why are they here? As if it's a threat, right? And I would like peek to kind of look out the window to see, like, I'm not expecting anybody, but maybe it's because of all the social media or the news where we feel like we fear break-ins or they're a robber, like it's somebody evil on the other side, right? A door-to-door salesman is there, or like somebody we don't want to talk to, a threat is at the door. And that's now our immediate reaction, as opposed to before we were so excited to go get the door, right? If somebody had stopped by. And so it's just a hilarious bit. So I definitely recommend go find it. You can look up, I think it's called Doorbell. But that concept in and of itself, right? Where all of a sudden, like just the society expectations, our realm of normal connections, drop-ins, hosting people, being hospitable, right? Like being a welcoming, safe place for anybody to come by. We've lost so much of that familiarity. I would say, like I went over to a friend's house last night. We meet in a small group at our church, and we're in each other's homes regularly. But to get to know new people, right? To keep expanding that out to more and more people, it's a lot harder to do that without really being intentional about it. And so I wanted to just kind of talk about a little bit today about some reasons why that's not happening anymore. And maybe just a new way for you to think about it, to consider like, okay, maybe there's a good reason to bring this back if it's something that you're familiar with, or maybe a good reason to start if it's something that you're not used to doing or you didn't grow up that way. But I think it does create and allow and foster really special connections. It helps bond us, it helps bring people together in a difference of going from just being familiar around people, kind of just an associate where we know people, but to really making it personal, where we actually feel like we really know them, like we're really seen and heard by these people. And we can meet that connection that people are really hungry for in those relationships that we really do need to bond in a different way to not feel lonely, right? That social media and technology and texting and even a phone conversation, like they don't satisfy completely. And I think it's amazing and it's fantastic. Like having that to be able to stay connected with friends that are at a state that we can't spend that intimate one-on-one in-person time with, right? Like there's amazing ways that we get to stay connected in that way. But we also can't underestimate the importance and the value of the person to person in our home connections that are still worth making an effort to create, right? And so I want to consider these things kind of hold us back, right? Like, so if I were to say, just what do you think about hospitality? What first comes to mind? I think for me, immediately, I think of like just the traditional hosting, like the way that I would have grown up, which would have been on an evening, most likely on the weekend, and there would be a home cooked meal. We would have helped clean up the house to prepare for the guests to come. We would have sat, we had a formal dining room growing up, and then there was like your kitchen table eating space. Like we had two spaces for dining, right? That almost seems like a foreign concept now. Who has two eating spaces in their home? And then how often are we using that formal space, right? So we had a formal dining room, and we would get out the special dishes for that time. I think it might have been my mom's and dad's wedding china. I'm not sure, but it wasn't like super crazy. Like she didn't go elaborate. Like I feel like my expectations are pretty chill. Like she doesn't love to entertain in the sense of like some people really go all out and make these beautiful tablescapes and like it's a production, right? I feel like my mom did a really great balance of it not being a ginormous crazy production, but also special, right? Like there was something we made it extra special. We went out of our way to put effort and care into this meal, right? It would have been a full course meal, right? There would have been a solid sides and a hefty main course, and there would be dessert, right? Like it was a different kind of meal than we had on the regular, just on a Tuesday if it was just my immediate family. We didn't have dessert during those times, right? But when we had company, we for sure had dessert. There's something just special and extra that it stood out separate than when it was just my immediate family. So that's what I think of mostly, right? There's like the professional hospitality business. So if that was something you didn't grow up with in your home, you might be thinking that of hotels and parties and big to-dos, right? The big elaborate, like the wedding receptions, those kinds of experiences that would be like a really big to-do, right? They're costly, they're fancy, they're pretty. And you might be thinking too of maybe it's expensive and it's an expensive gathering. It's going to take a lot of time. It takes a lot of effort. There's a lot of pressure for it to be something really unique and amazing. It's got to look right and smell right and taste right. And right, like you need to become a professional party planner, decorator, chef, and baker. And I think that was an area that I think for me, even though I grew up in a very normal realm of having company and it looked like a manageable thing, I had so much food issues that I hated that part. And for years, I resisted having people over or wanting to have people over, even really honestly wanting to be at other people's houses because I just felt like especially like a potluck. If anybody knows what a potluck is, that's when everybody brings some food to contribute and we all share the food. Hated them. Like, do not enjoy them at all. I would rather 10 out of 10 go meet at a coffee shop. Like, I wanted the connection, but I didn't want all of the work. I didn't want all of the other aspects about it, right? And so maybe when you hear hospitality, you think high pressure and performance, these unrealistic expectations that it's going to have to be something extravagant and elaborate. And so it just feels overwhelming to want to do it. So what I want you to think about is, what part of the hospitality do you like and do you not like? Right? So for me, where I shared already a little bit of like, I really did not like all the pressure that I felt about the pressure of the food needing to be just right. I think for me, it wasn't really about the house. It wasn't so much about the linens or the table, like it wasn't about the decorations, but it definitely was about the food. And I feel like, I don't know, I mean, I can make some pretty basic dishes. Like, I'm not a glamorous cook, but I feel like I could make a decent enough of a meal, right? Like, there was enough, like, I know how to just kind of naturally do it if I have to do it. But really, for me, there was something, an attitude about it, a feeling about it that just made it feel drudgery. Like, I just couldn't get around the other aspect around it to understand how to enjoy it, right? And so that's really what I want for you to rethink for yourself, right? Like, how can you re-choose or recreate the purpose of hospitality for you? And ultimately, if we replace that word hospitality with connection, how do you need to re-choose or recreate nurturing and building connection with other people? And so, starting just right there, do you want deeper connections with people? Do you want to build? And maybe you have an immediate circle, but you feel like, we're familiar, we're kind of going around and doing life, we know a lot about each other, but maybe you want it to be deeper. You want it to feel more like family, maybe more like we're living life together and we have each other's backs. What are ways that you can use hospitality to grow in hospitality, to enjoy hospitality, that would help nurture those connections? And I think even more so than you feeling nurtured, I think, what is it that you have, your skills, your value, your love and support, that actually you can offer to somebody else, right? Like, how is this just as much about somebody else needing a connection than you needing the connection? And so I want you to think about that too for yourself right now. What would it look like? What would you want it to look like? Who needs it? Who needs it more? Is it just about you, or is it about what you can offer to serve and what other people might need too? And I think the beautiful thing about it too is that a lot of times it is one of those, like, it's better to give than receive. But when we do those things, we actually get to receive when we give, and vice versa. I'm going to do a couple of little mini episodes about this topic, and we'll get a little more practical and talk about a little bit more different aspects. But I wanted to just start this conversation to get you thinking about, do you want deeper connections? And if so, what is stopping you from doing it? And I think hospitality is going to be an amazing, beautiful, important gift that we need in this upcoming year. It is the antidote to the distant social media knowings. right? Like, how else can we help people to feel seen and heard? And for you to feel seen and heard than in the comfort and in the safety of our four walls. And if you aren't there yet, what would it look like to get it there? What is it that's really stopping you from doing it? I think there's a couple of, there's like several reasons that I think stops people from wanting to be hospitable, or to stop them from feeling like they can't and they're not enough, right? I think there's fear of judgment of our space, right? Like we feel worried that our house isn't nice enough, it's not clean enough, it's not as up to date as other people's might be, right? Like, or what are the people that I'm inviting? Do they have a nicer home? Do they have more money than me? Do they have better jobs? Like, it's all this judgment and comparing of what we think they're expecting from us and really not valuing what we have and feeling proud of our space. I think one, especially in this day and age with inflation, is a financial concern, right? I feel like, man, the meal that I would make for company versus the meal that I would make for my family, it's easy to feel like it's so much more expensive. But one of the things, just as a quick nugget on that note, is I keep thinking about like how much it would cost if we met at a restaurant. And if I can at least keep our bill cheaper than that, then we're ahead, right? So better yet, then they're in my home and we're spending the same or a little less than what we would have at a restaurant. And depending on how great you are at really like budgeting and knowing how to make the most cost efficient meal, like, man, it could be significantly less, especially if you have a big family. If you have a lot of kids or you're inviting somebody over with a lot of kids, right? It gets expensive. So financial concerns is certainly a consideration with the cost of groceries and food. And then especially if you're feeling like you need to have all the perfect furniture and the perfect tablecloth and the plates and right, all of the service in it, the decorations, that can add up a lot too. And those pressures that we put on ourselves. I think another reason that gets in our way is just plain old busyness and overwhelm. We're just so weighed down by our own troubles in life. We just can't imagine doing more work, right? Like company just can feel like work to bring them into our home. And it's making food that's now the pressure's up to perform for somebody else. And we can just barely make it through the day ourselves. We can't imagine having to add other people into that mix, right? Or maybe we just don't even have a handle on our calendar. Like, even if I wanted to have people over, if they invited us over, when would we have time? Our schedules are so jam-packed, we don't even have room for an extra date in there. I think another one that can definitely come into it, we've kind of already talked about it, is a lack of confidence, right? Even just the willingness to believe that people would say yes. Would they even want to if I asked them to come over? Is what I have to offer good enough for them? Do I feel like what would I even talk to them about, let alone just the practicals of planning it, serving it, preparing for it? What do we do if they do come, right? Maybe there's overwhelm in I don't know what we would do when they're coming. I don't know how to have conversations. Like, what would we talk about? And it can feel so scary and so frightening. I think it's also possible that maybe there's been some bad past experiences. Maybe there was a really uncomfortable dynamic one time, or you're no longer friends with those people, or maybe they really did judge you, which would really be unfortunate, right? Like if somebody criticized your home and didn't want to be there, or criticized, or you burned the dinner, or something really embarrassing happened, right? I remember, as a side note, we had hosted a whole bunch of out-of-town campus students that were in town for our church. They were doing like a big campus retreat kind of thing. And so we hosted them for a meal. And so I was willing to do that. I wanted to help out, but we had probably, I don't know, maybe it was just like 10 campus. Most of them were guys. I've never fed those kind of people. I didn't have teen boys. I didn't have teens at all, right? Like we all ate normal proportions of food. And I think I had planned for tacos, and I'd only made 2 pounds of taco meat, which in my mind, I felt like was a huge amount, right? Like, is when you make a taco, you put such a small amount of meat in there. And that meat was, I mean, I had so many other fixings to go with it, right? I had all the sides and lettuce and tomatoes and sour cream and, right, like a beautiful spread. But in comparison, I did not have enough meat for that many of people. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is terrible. Like, how did I underestimate? Right. And so it'd be so tempting in that moment to be like, I will never do this again. Like, I failed big time. These people are starving now. Like, what else can I feed them? And how is this? It's so awkward. Right. And I doubt that anybody even remembers that moment. And luckily, I didn't let it scar me forever. But things like that do happen, right? Where we're like, oh my gosh, or I'll never have those people over again. So it can be our past experiences, or maybe even in that, it never even was a part of your culture or your way you were raised up. So it's just a foreign concept. You've never even thought about it. And so it just would be completely unknown. I don't even know what to think about it because I've never done it. And so I think there's so many misconceptions about what hospitality should be, can be. There's so many things that we get stuck and hung up on. And so I think for me, when I was really going through this phase where I felt like I really wanted to be hospitable, but there were so many hangups and things about it that it made it really hard for me. And I had to really be able to break down what those walls were. What am I actually upset about? And we talk about that a lot on this podcast. And being able to break down, like, what is it really for me? What is stopping me? What is actually in my way? What is my but about having people over in my home? What is it that's like, oh, I really want to, but then this. If only this was different, then I could. What is that thing for you? And I want you to start to just be in a position of curiosity and start to consider and think through what your past experiences have been. What did you like about it or not like about it? Or maybe if it's not something that's ever been normal for you, what would it even look like? Maybe even just start to be like, boy, that would be so strange. What happens when you have people over? What does it look like? Maybe you have a particular person who loves entertainment, loves to decorate, loves to like all the attention to details. Maybe they're in your mind as a standard that you can never meet, and therefore you're never good enough. And so I cannot do it, right? Who's that person? Who's that experience? The bar that is set. That's like, if I can't do this, then I can't do it at all. And I can't do that. So therefore I'm not going to do it. Who is holding you hostage that you can't perform well? And I think too, right? Who is it that I'm trying to serve? Who is it that could benefit from me inviting them into their home? What am I afraid of? What is it in me that I feel like I'm not good enough to provide? What is it in them that I think I can't help them or love them or they would want to come? What is it about the whole situation? There's so many aspects to it that could be really beneficial and helpful and is necessary for ultimately what the purpose of hospitality is: connection, right? It's just a way to help people feel welcomed, to feel loved, to feel seen, to feel good, right? To feel like they care. Is there ever a time where you wouldn't want somebody else to feel like they mattered? When we think of it that way, doesn't it sound so crazy? Like, why would I not? We want that for people, right? I assume I want people to feel loved around me. I want them to feel safe. I want them to feel like if they needed something, they could call on me. And honestly, I think we really do want that ourselves too, don't we? Don't you want to feel like you can call somebody when you need help, that somebody else cares enough about you that would be welcome to invite you into their home? That if you had a need, that they would want to meet it? And so thinking through, what could that possibly look like? What would be some reasons that I would want that? Maybe what are some reasons that you have not had it before? And whether that's just because that wasn't how you grew up, or maybe because you've been burned, or you're just super independent, that you're so locked down and don't need people, that you're like, I would never even want to be that involved with somebody else. I want you to start to explore why. What could you be missing out on, right? You might be totally functioning and you can survive and not change that at all, and life will continue to go on. But I want you to consider what you might be missing out by not engaging with others in that way. And who else might be missing out because they don't get to receive from you. And they don't actually get to give to you either. When we think of it from those terms, right, where each one of us was given a purpose, an identity, and something that only we can do for others, that we were made to share with other people, that we were given to nurture and to use to benefit ourselves and other people. How are we using that gift? How are we allowing other people to use that gift with us? So that's all we're going to talk about today, to just kind of plant the seed of the value of those nurturing connections, the value of inviting people into your home. And then we can get into the more practicals and nitty gritty of how can we switch to re-choose and recreate, but it's got to start with our why. Thanks for listening to Beyond the Walls. If this episode inspired you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with a friend and leave a review. Your support helps more women step into their courage and purpose. Ready for more? Subscribe to the podcast and contact me. You can find me at beyondthewallspodcast.com. Reach out for coaching, more resources, and all the support you could need. Remember, breaking through the walls is just the beginning. Your best life is waiting.